Depart before the children awaken. Your concern for their slumber is amusing. It wasn't a worry in Jeju, was it? Maya remained motionless. Her gaze swept past him, lingering on Minjun and Sua's sleeping forms within the house, before returning to her husband. She retrieved her own suitcase, stepped past him into the downpour, and halted at the boundary. One final matter, she stated. Tomorrow morning, please examine the mailbox. There's a communication for your mother. She'll want to see it before she once again labels me a gold digger. He stood transfixed in the entryway, a sudden uncertainty gripping him, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. Why was a smile gracing her lips instead of tears? What made the word makes drain the color from his face? What transpired in Chidu that remained unexplained? And where precisely was she heading now? Adrift in the rain with no refuge, based on all he believed he knew about her. By dawn, Maya was positioned behind the imposing iron gates of a Gangnam residence, a place even her husband had never laid eyes on. These gates swung open at the mere input of a code known only to her. Every tenet Do-yoon held about his docile, compliant spouse was poised to shatter, and he wouldn't grasp the full extent of the devastation until that mailbox was opened. This is her narrative, commencing on the very night everyone assumed she had lost everything. A decade prior to that rain-soaked evening, Maya Whitfield, a 24-year-old English instructor, stood before a classroom in Seoul, entirely unaware that the unassuming, well-dressed gentleman awaiting his cousin outside the school gates was destined to irrevocably alter the course of her existence. His name was Kang. There are moments I miss Atlanta more than I anticipated, he confessed. Primarily the cuisine and my relatives. Elaborate, she prompted. We used to have large neighborhood barbecues and shared Sunday meals. What melodies evoke a sense of home for you? Anything that brings my family to mind. He was not ostentatious or attention-seeking. He possessed patience, attentiveness, and an insatiable curiosity about her life back in Atlanta, her family, the flavors she longed for, and the music that soundtracked her youth. For a woman adrift thousands of miles from her origins, such focused attention felt like finally being truly seen. Do-yoon hailed from a distinguished Gangnam real estate lineage, the sort whose name alone unlocked opportunities before a word was even spoken. His mother, a sharp, composed matriarch universally known as Madame Yoon, made her opinions on Maya unequivocally clear from their initial encounter. A foreigner? Madame Yoon declared flatly, making no effort to temper her voice as Maya stood a few paces away in the corridor. My son could have had his pick of anyone, and he chose this. Maya absorbed every syllable, remaining silent. She reassured herself that respect and persistence would eventually melt the resolve of a woman such as Madame Yoon. It was akin to her belief that love was a prize earned through sacrifice rather than an inherent gift. She was mistaken on both counts. She had no inkling at that moment precisely how many years it would take to arrive at this realization, nor the profound cost of that education. Nevertheless, for the initial 5 years, life felt abundant. I desire a partner. Yoon proposed on a rooftop terrace offering a panoramic view of Seoul Tower, pledging a partnership, not a subservient role. She embraced his words wholeheartedly. Yes. Their union was solemnized in an understated ceremony, an event Madame Yoon grudgingly attended. Within 2 years, Maya welcomed their son, Minjun. 4 years later, their daughter, Sua, was born. Maya relinquished her teaching position the year Minjun was born, never to return. She convinced herself it was a temporary interlude, a fleeting season she would revisit once the children were older. Seasons transitioned into years, and she never did. By the time their 8th anniversary loomed, Maya had, by all conventional standards, transformed into the quintessential wife of the Kang family. Her Korean fluency was impeccable. She managed the household with flawless efficiency. She never once raised her voice during family dinners. regardless of the veiled barbs Madame Yoon offered regarding her culinary skills, her accent, or her sartorial choices. Do-yoon, however, had begun to shift long before Maya perceived it clearly. It commenced with subtle alterations. Extended hours at the office. A mobile device he started positioning away from her on the kitchen counter. A new propensity for stepping outside to conduct phone conversations. He had never previously concealed anything. Maya rationalized it as stress. She told herself that successful men from demanding families sometimes withdrew before re-engaging. She maintained the household, ensured the children were fed and cherished, maintained her cheerful demeanor at Sunday gatherings, and awaited her husband's return. He did not return. He drifted further away. And the very first indication of the extent of his departure was already en route to their doorstep, elegantly encased in opulent paper and adorned with a silken ribbon. The initial fracture in the narrative Maya had constructed for herself materialized on an unremarkable Tuesday afternoon, delivered by a florist entirely oblivious to the seismic shift he was about to instigate. A magnificent arrangement of white peonies arrived at the front door, swathed in premium paper and secured with a silken ribbon. Maya had never once informed Do-yoon of her preference for peonies, largely because she did not care for them. Stay! She signed for the delivery, assuming it might be a conciliatory gesture for his absence at Sua's school event the preceding week. Finally remembered. She opened the small card nestled amongst the stems, anticipating her own name. Summon, thank you for last night. You make me feel young again. D. Maya stood in the entryway, clutching those blossoms for what felt like an eternity, though it was likely closer to 10 minutes. Her hands remained steady. Her breathing was undisturbed. Looking back, what astonished her most was her profound serenity, as if a quiet inner premonition had anticipated this moment and was simply awaiting confirmation. She did not contact Do-yoon. She did not shriek, weep, or hurl the vase against the wall as she imagined a woman in her predicament might. Instead, she contacted the florist. There appears to have been a misunderstanding, Maya stated pleasantly. I believe these were intended for someone named Suman. Could you please forward them to the correct address? I've located the delivery slip. She read aloud, an address hastily scribbled on the very same slip the florist had inadvertently left behind. It was an office building downtown, a location Maya had never encountered until that afternoon. The floral arrangement, card included, was rerouted within the hour. That evening, Do-yoon returned home and inquired, with almost excessive casualness, did any deliveries arrive today? No. Were there expected to be any? No reason. Just checking. She served him dinner. She inquired about his day. She listened as he lamented a challenging client, nodding in all the appropriate places, while within her a door quietly swung shut. She had no foresight at that moment regarding the multitude of doors that would close in the ensuing months, nor the ultimate discovery awaiting behind the final one. Weeks elapsed. Maya continued her vigil, though she never betrayed it. She noted the subtle modulation in the vibrations of Do-yoon's phone, the shorter bursts, the swift silences. She observed his newfound habit of showering the instant he crossed the threshold, even on days he claimed to have been ensnared in meetings all afternoon. The second piece of evidence arrived almost by chance, the typical manner in which clandestine affairs eventually reveal themselves to a perceptive observer. Do-yoon left his phone on the kitchen counter one evening before heading for his shower. It emitted a single buzz, its screen illuminating beside the fruit bowl. Maya was not the sort of wife who routinely perused her husband's phone. She had never felt compelled to do so previously, but an inexplicable impulse urged her to look, and she did. A message preview glowed on the lock screen from a contact designated simply as S. Can't stop thinking about Chedu. When can I see you again? Maya read it twice. carefully returned the phone to its original position, angled at the precise same inclination, and resumed folding laundry at the kitchen table as if nothing had transpired. When Do-yoon emerged from the shower, minutes later, he found his wife precisely where he had left her, softly humming as she folded Min-jun's school uniform. "Everything is fine." "Is everything okay?" he inquired, drying his hair with a towel. "Are you amenable to breakfast fare twice?" "Everything is fine, Maya," she replied, smiling up at him. "Sua desires pancakes for dinner. Are you all right with breakfast food 2 times this week?" "Whatever brings her happiness," he said, bestowing a kiss upon her forehead before retiring to the bedroom. Maya remained seated for another moment, the towel from Min-jun's uniform still warm in her grasp, and arrived at a decision that would profoundly shape the subsequent months of her existence. She would not confront him with suspicion. She would ascertain the true nature of Do-yoon Kang's transformation with her own eyes before uttering a single word. That opportunity presented itself 3 weeks later, and what she would witness through the expansive windows of that hotel lobby would leave her utterly immobile for nearly 20 minutes, incapable of initiating any movement. Maya informed Do-yoon that she was taking the children to visit her friend Ariam for the afternoon, which was only partially accurate. She dropped Min-jun and Sua at Ariam's apartment, requesting that she keep them for a few additional hours, offering no further explanation. "There's something I need to attend to." Aram, who had observed Maya's growing quietude over the preceding weeks, posed no questions. She simply advised, "Be careful," and closed the door. Maya changed in her car outside a shopping complex, exchanging her usual soft cardigan for a long dark coat, oversized sunglasses, and a scarf she had acquired years prior but never worn. She drove to a 5-star establishment in Cheongdam, a name she had overheard during one of Do-yoon's phone calls, which he believed she was not attentive to, and occupied a seat in the lobby cafe facing the elevators. She ordered a coffee, which she barely touched, and waited. Nearly 2 hours transpired. Business travelers arrived and departed. A wedding party swept through the lobby in a shimmering tableau of white and gold. Maya was beginning to suspect she had squandered an entire afternoon pursuing a mere hunch when the front doors parted, and Do-yoon entered, dressed casually, his attention fixed on his phone. A young woman was already positioned near the concierge desk, her posture relaxed and familiar in a manner that conveyed everything before a single word was exchanged. Do-yoon walked directly to her, encircled her waist with his arms, and kissed the crown of her head, the identical gesture he bestowed upon Maya each morning before departing for work. The woman chuckled at something he uttered, nestled against his side, and the pair proceeded towards the elevators, vanishing behind the closing doors as if they possessed absolutely nothing to conceal. Maya remained perfectly still in that lobby cafe, sunglasses still in place, observing the ascent of the elevator numbers. She did not weep. She did not pursue them. She ordered a second coffee, sat there for an additional 20 minutes until her hands ceased their trembling, and then navigated back across the city to retrieve her children, her voice blending with the radio's melody for the entire journey. Because Min-jun invariably inquired about her quietude during car rides, and on this particular day she needed him not to ask. What Maya remained unaware of, as she drove home that evening with her hands finally steady on the steering wheel, was that this hotel lobby was not the final revelation awaiting her that year. It was merely the second. The concluding piece materialized a month later, and it was almost too effortlessly acquired. Do-yoon announced at dinner that he had an upcoming business excursion, a conference in Jeju, that would necessitate his absence for 4 days. Maya nodded, inquired about his packing requirements, and offered to handle his luggage, a task she had consistently undertaken for 8 years of their marriage. While he showered that evening, Maya laid his suits on the bed and reached for his laptop bag to place his charger inside. A printed itinerary lay folded in the front pocket, the airline logo prominently displayed at the top. She unfolded it more out of habit than suspicion. 2 names were listed side by side on the booking confirmation, his and Sumin's. The identical flight, departure time, resort, and room number clearly inscribed beneath a heading that read, "Party of 2." Maya refolded the paper precisely along its original creases, slid it back into the same pocket, zipped the bag shut, and placed it by the bedroom door, precisely where Do-yoon invariably left it before a trip. When he emerged from the bathroom minutes later, toweling his hair, he found his wife seated on the edge of their bed, a smile upon her face. "Everything is packed," she stated. "Have a safe flight." "Thanks," he replied, his gaze barely meeting hers as he pulled on a t-shirt. "You're the best." Maya remained awake long after he succumbed to sleep beside her that night, her eyes fixed on the ceiling of a bedroom that now felt profoundly alien. She contemplated her son, who now inquired almost daily about his father's perpetual absence from dinner. She thought of her daughter, still too young to perceive the underlying discord, reaching for a father who was already predominantly absent. She reflected on 8 years of folding his clothes, navigating his mother's expectations, and meticulously constructing a life around a man who had, with quiet deliberation, erected another parallel existence. By morning, Do-yoon was gone, his suitcase in hand, offering a perfunctory kiss at the door as if the previous night had never occurred. Maya stood in the doorway, watching his car recede down the street, and made the resolution that would set every subsequent event in motion. She would not erupt. She would not pack her belongings in a fit of rage and present him with the conclusion he had likely already envisioned for her: the emotional wife, the dramatic scene, the convenient villain in whatever narrative he would eventually recount to his mother. Instead, she would bestow upon him something undeserved and entirely unforeseen. Time! 6 months, she determined, standing alone in the silent house. 6 months to ascertain if any vestige of the man she had married still existed beneath the one who now carried the scent of another woman's perfume. If he returned to his family of his own volition, she would find a way to surmount what she had witnessed and embark anew. If he did not, she vowed to herself, gazing at her own reflection in the hallway mirror, she would extricate herself from that marriage, precisely as she had entered it, on her own terms, and never, ever empty-handed. She had no premonition that morning of the vast distances those 6 months would carry her, nor how precariously close she would come over the subsequent 2 years to losing everything before she even had the opportunity to depart with it. The 6 months commenced subtly, the way most countdowns do before the realization dawns that time is already slipping away. Maya made no pronouncements to Do-yoon. She simply began observing with increased acuity, much like one studies meteorological patterns before an anticipated storm. She noted which evenings he returned late. She catalogued the excuses that recurred and those that deviated from his previous renditions. 3 weeks after his excursion to Jeju, Do-yoon returned bearing a faint, unfamiliar floral perfume, decidedly not hers. It was something delicate and expensive, quite unlike the simple products Maya kept in their shared bathroom. "It was a demanding day," she remarked, accepting his coat at the door. "You have no idea," he responded, avoiding her gaze. She hung the coat in its accustomed place and remained silent. During dinner that evening, Minjun looked up from his rice and posed a question that had been brewing within him for weeks. The kind of query children ask without comprehending its profound impact. "Dad, why don't you ever eat dinner with us anymore?" Do-yoon glanced up, taken aback. "Work has been demanding, buddy," he stated. "It won't always be like this." Sua, only 4 years old and still small enough to reach for her father, without the burgeoning complexities her brother now harbored, clambered onto Do-yoon's lap and requested if he could read her bedtime story that night instead of Maya. "Not tonight, sweetheart," he said, already discreetly checking his phone beneath the table. "Daddy has a call." Maya watched her daughter's expression falter for a fleeting moment before the girl recovered with the swift, uncomplaining resilience characteristic of children, already learning to temper her expectations. Later that night, after both children had retired for the evening, Maya sat alone in the kitchen, a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. She contemplated the exchange with her son and the quiet disappointment etched on her daughter's face, and made a solemn vow to herself that had no bearing on Do-yun. Whatever transpired next, her children would not grow up believing this was the embodiment of love. The subsequent month, Madame Yoon hosted one of her customary Sunday family dinners, gatherings Maya had attended with unwavering diligence for 8 years, always arriving early to assist in the kitchen and departing late after tidying dishes that no one else offered to handle. On this particular Sunday, Madame Yoon exuded an unusual air of self-satisfaction, moving through the dining room with the contented energy of someone privy to information the rest of the table lacked. "Maya," she announced, settling into her seat at the head of the table. "You appear fatigued lately." Marriage is not so facile when a woman fails to maintain her husband's interest, is it? Do-yun shifted uncomfortably beside Maya, but offered no comment. Maya responded with a polite smile, the same practiced expression she had worn for a decade in that dining room. "I have never encountered difficulty in keeping myself interesting," she stated. "Perhaps the pertinent question is whether everyone in this family still possesses the capacity to appreciate it." Madame Yoon's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, but she refrained from further commentary on the matter, opting instead to loudly extol her own culinary prowess to the entire table. Do-yun did not defend his wife during that entire exchange. Maya observed this omission. She always did. What Maya had not yet perceived was that her composed, measured response that evening had inadvertently sown a seed of suspicion in Madame Yoon's mind. A suspicion destined to blossom into something far more perilous in the months ahead. Driving home that night, with both children slumbering in the back seat, Do-yun finally broke the silence, his voice imbued with an edge Maya had not previously detected. "You did not need to say that to my mother," he remarked. "And you did not need to sit there and permit her to speak to me in that manner." Maya replied evenly, her gaze fixed on the road before them. Do-yun offered no response. The remainder of the drive was consumed by a silence that had become distressingly commonplace in their household over the preceding months. It was around this juncture, approximately 2 months into her self-imposed 6-month moratorium, that Maya quietly began to construct something of her own, though she could not articulate even to herself precisely what she was endeavoring to build. It commenced modestly. A few freelance translation assignments from Korean to English, secured through an old university acquaintance, undertaken late at night after the children were asleep. And Do-yun was either at the office or elsewhere, a location Maya no longer bothered to speculate about. The remuneration was modest, barely exceeding pocket money in comparison to the household budget controlled by Do-yun, but it was hers, earned discreetly, deposited into an account she opened under her maiden name, utilizing a post office box that Do-yun would never contemplate investigating. She confided in no one except a single individual. Aryam Han had been Maya's closest confidante since their university days in Seoul, back when Ari was pursuing finance and Maya was immersed in literature, 2 young women navigating a foreign country through vastly different approaches. Aryam had observed the gradual disintegration of Maya's marriage from a cautious distance for months, offering nothing but quiet solidarity and the occasional pointed inquiry that Maya was not yet prepared to address. One evening, amidst the quiet hum of a shared coffee, while the children were absorbed in a floor puzzle, Maya finally confided in her friend. She spoke of the flowers, the clandestine message on the lock screen, the hotel rendezvous in Gangnam, and how the detailed itinerary was concealed within the confines of a laptop bag. Aryam listened intently, her composure gradually hardening with each revealed detail, until Maya, emotionally drained from the solitary burden of her story, concluded her account and leaned back. "Why haven't you confronted him about it?" Aryam inquired softly. Maya responded, "Because the instant I voice my concerns, it escalates into a battle I'm compelled to win through sheer anger, especially with his mother present, and within a family that already deems me inadequate. I'd prefer to achieve victory through a different approach." Aryam observed her friend for a considerable duration. "And what approach would that be?" she asked. Maya lowered her gaze to her hands. "I'm not entirely certain yet," she admitted, "but I am resolute that I will not depart that household empty-handed, not after the sacrifices I've made to establish it. It was Aryam who initially introduced the concept of the startup, a nascent biotechnology enterprise, largely unrecognized beyond a select circle of investors. One of Aryam's investment firms had discreetly commenced its support several months prior. This was the kind of venture that would scarcely warrant a second glance from the established, old money families of Gangnam. It was deemed too modest, too novel, and too precarious for individuals accustomed to the stability of well-established real estate, the very foundation upon which the Kang family had amassed their fortune. "I'm not suggesting you stake your entire fortune," Aryam cautioned gently, sliding a research dossier across the table one evening. "What I am suggesting is that if you have any savings, however modest, this represents the kind of opportunity that could genuinely flourish. There are no guarantees, of course. Nothing ever is, but this is tangible." Maya spent a significant portion of that night poring over the folder after Aryam's departure. She navigated through pages filled with terminology she barely grasped on her initial perusal, staying awake long after the household had fallen into slumber, diligently teaching herself concepts she had never previously encountered. Market capitalization, the distinct phases of clinical trials, projected valuations. Initially, her available capital was minimal. A few $100,000 meticulously earned from her translation endeavors. This sum felt both immense and daunting to risk in its entirety. She invested what she could manage that month, a modest sum, promising herself she would contribute further, only if she could generate the necessary funds without depleting the household budget. Do-yoon remained oblivious to any financial resources she might possess beyond the allocated allowance for groceries. Neither Maya nor Aryam had any inkling at that juncture how swiftly that quiet decision would face its ultimate test, or from whom the challenge would originate. 3 months into her 6-month self-imposed timeline, the subtle fissures within her marriage had widened into undeniable chasms, perceptible even to those outside the immediate family circle. During yet another family gathering, Maya's sister-in-law, the wife of Do-yoon's cousin, discreetly cornered her in the kitchen, her voice reduced to a near whisper. "Is everything all right between you and Do-yoon?" she inquired. "People are beginning to gossip." "What others choose to say," Maya retorted, "has never once provided sustenance for my children's table. I will concern myself with it when it does." The cousin's wife faltered, clearly taken aback by Maya's response, and did not pursue the matter further. That same week, Do-yoon returned home past midnight for the 3rd occasion, citing a client dinner that had extended considerably. Maya no longer felt the inclination to question the veracity of his explanations aloud. She simply nodded, inquired if he had eaten, and then proceeded to check on the children, who had both fallen asleep while awaiting a father who never arrived. Manjun, at 7 years old and increasingly astute, had begun posing more challenging inquiries. "Are you and Ah going to get a divorce?" he asked one evening, entirely unprompted, as Ma was tucking him into bed. Mia sat on the edge of his mattress, carefully selecting her words. "Why would you ask such a thing, my darling?" she inquired. "Because Ju's parents divorced last year," he replied, referring to a classmate, "and his mother was always sad before it happened. Kind of like you sometimes." Ma gently stroked his hair back from his forehead, her chest tightening with an emotion she carefully concealed from her expression. "Whatever transpires between your father and me," she stated deliberately, "you and your sister will perpetually, without question, be cherished and looked after. That is the sole certainty that will endure. Do you comprehend me?" Jun nodded slowly, seemingly placated, and closed his eyes. Maya remained seated in the darkness, long after his breathing had settled into a steady rhythm. More convinced than ever that any decision she ultimately made would be born not of fear, but of a resolute determination to ensure her children were shielded from anything less than the life they unequivocally deserved. By the 4th month, the modest investment Maya had placed in Ariam's biotechnology recommendation had experienced growth, not explosively, but consistently. This steady increase enabled her to allocate more funds each month from her translation earnings, treating it less as a speculative venture and more as a disciplined practice. A quiet ritual she observed in solitude late at night while the rest of the household slumbered. She also began independently researching real estate, immersing herself in the intricacies of the Gangnam property market with the same dedication she had once applied to devoured novels during her university years. She meticulously studied every detail, taking notes and deciphering patterns that Do-yoon had spent his entire professional life learning from his father. These were patterns that Maya was now assiduously teaching herself from the ground up, driven solely by necessity and a quiet, simmering indignation. Do-yoon remained entirely unaware of these developments. He was too engrossed in his clandestine second life, which he confidently believed remained completely concealed, and too complacent in the assurance of an obedient, often preoccupied wife of 8 years to ever suspect that she might be meticulously constructing something entirely her own, entirely beneath his radar. However, another member of the family had begun to take notice, and by the 5th month, this nascent suspicion would nearly jeopardize everything Maya had spent months building in secrecy. The 5th month marked the closest semblance to a confrontation the marriage had witnessed thus far. Nevertheless, it was not the true confrontation Maya was actively preparing for. The genuine peril that month was not originating from Do-yoon at all. It commenced with a telephone conversation that Maya was never intended to overhear. Madame Yoon had grown suspicious of the uncharacteristic and unfamiliar serenity that had enveloped her daughter-in-law in recent months. In Madame Yoon's estimation, the Maya of earlier times would have been visibly distressed by now, tearful and desperate, pleading for the preservation of her marriage. This current Maya, however, exhibited a composed demeanor that profoundly unsettled Madame Yoon, and historically, Maya had long since learned that women experiencing such unease within that family tended to actively seek out answers. Maya had ascended to the upper floor during a Sunday visit to check on Sua, who had retired with a headache, and as she passed the study, she overheard Madame Yoon's voice through the partially ajar door, speaking in a low, clipped tone she rarely employed. "I don't care about the cost," Madame Yoon was articulating into the phone. "I need to ascertain precisely where that woman is deriving her newfound confidence from. Something has fundamentally changed, and I require full disclosure before my son commits to any irreversible decision." Maya stood frozen in the hallway, her heart hammering against her ribs with such force that she was convinced it could be heard through the door. Madame Yoon had evidently engaged a private investigator, a confidant of the family with a specialization in such discreet inquiries, to look into Maya. She slowly retreated, slipped into the bathroom further down the corridor, and sat on the edge of the tub, her hands pressed firmly against her mouth, her mind racing through every potential avenue that could be exploited. The translation account registered under her maiden name, the post office box. Ariam's name was linked to the biotechnology investment. Should the investigator uncover even one of these threads and pursue it diligently, everything Maya had painstakingly built over 5 months could unravel before she even had the opportunity to leverage it. That night, long after the children had succumbed to sleep, Maya telephoned Ariam, her voice laced with a palpable sense of panic. The composure she had maintained for months was finally beginning to falter. "She's having someone investigate me," Mia stated, pacing the kitchen, her voice barely a whisper, even though she was alone in the house. "I overheard her on the phone. She knows something has changed." Ariam's voice, usually characterized by its light-hearted reassurance, immediately adopted a serious tone. "How much does she know?" Ariam inquired. "I'm not sure," Maya confessed. "That's what terrifies me the most." Ariam was silent for a moment. "All right," she finally responded. "We need to accelerate our plans. Tomorrow, I will contact someone who can assist us in preempting this before it escalates into a significant issue." Maya slowly lowered herself onto a kitchen chair, her gaze fixed on nothing, and for the first time grasped the precariousness of everything she had meticulously constructed. One careless misstep, one single thread tugged by the wrong individual at the wrong juncture, and 5 months of careful planning could vanish overnight. Sitting there in the dimly lit kitchen that night, she had no premonition as to whether she had already made that critical error without realizing it. The threat posed by the investigator did not dissipate overnight. For nearly 3 weeks, Maya carried the weight of that fear as a tangible entity, a constant pressure residing just behind her ribcage. Ariam's contact proved to be an individual of whom Ariam held the utmost trust. A lawyer named Hana Seo, whose involvement in Maya's life was necessitated earlier and with greater urgency than originally anticipated. Hana possessed a particular expertise in precisely such delicate situations. Assisting women entangled in complex marital circumstances who required the discreet and swift protection of their assets before undue scrutiny could be applied. "We must relocate everything immediately," Hannah advised Maya during their initial consultation in a modest office situated far from Gangnam, a location where the Kang family's influence held no sway. "Not next month. Now. Whatever assets are registered in your sole name must be transferred into a structure that an external investigator cannot readily trace." Within a matter of days, Hana efficiently restructured the limited assets Maya had managed to accumulate thus far. This included the translation account and the modest stake in the biotechnology venture, cloaking them behind legal safeguards that rendered their ownership nearly impossible to trace back to Maya for anyone relying on conjecture and hearsay rather than legitimate legal channels. "We managed to act in time," Hana informed her over the telephone, though her voice lacked its usual calm assurance. "However, Maya, you must exercise extreme caution from this point forward. Not a single mistake. Whatever you are in the process of building must remain entirely segregated from anything connected to your husband's name." For nearly 3 weeks, Maya lived in a state of heightened vigilance, anticipating the moment Do-Yun might return home with the critical question, the one that would signal Madam Yoon's investigator had uncovered something. She mentally rehearsed responses while preparing meals. She doubled her visits to the post office box, checking it twice a week instead of once. She ceased accepting translation calls at her residence altogether, relocating them instead to a small cafe in a neighboring district where she was not recognized. That pivotal question from Do-Yoon never materialized. The investigator's search, strategically delayed by Hana's swift intervention, yielded no actionable intelligence. Madame Yoon, frustrated and unable to articulate her suspicions without admitting to secretly surveilling her own son's wife, eventually abandoned the inquiry, convincing herself she had merely been experiencing unfounded imaginings, a woman searching for a rationale for a daughter-in-law she had never desired in the first place. Maya exhaled fully, an act that felt like a profound release after weeks of tension, and expressed her gratitude to Aryam and Hana in a manner that words could scarcely convey. Nevertheless, something within her had irrevocably shifted. She now understood with absolute clarity the inherent fragility of everything she was in the process of constructing, and the heightened level of vigilance she would need to maintain until the day it was unequivocally and undeniably her own. That same week, during the 5th month, the marriage experienced its own silent confrontation, one entirely unrelated to investigators or clandestine financial dealings. Do-yoon returned home one evening, displaying a palpable tension and irritability that had no bearing on Maya. He snapped at Sua for spilling water on the dining table, his voice considerably sharper than the situation warranted. The young girl's face instantly crumpled, and she ran to Maya, tears streaming down her face, while Do-yoon stood there, appearing almost surprised by his own outburst. Maya scooped her daughter into her arms, gently soothing her, and looked at her husband over Sua's head. "She's 4 years old," Maya stated quietly. "Whatever you are dealing with, it does not belong in this home, and it most certainly does not belong directed at your children." Do-yoon opened his mouth as if to retort, then closed it again, running a hand through his hair. "You're right," he conceded finally. "I apologize. I've simply had a great deal on my mind lately." Maya studied him for a prolonged moment, scrutinizing his face for any vestige of the man she had married a decade prior. Any fleeting sign of the partnership he had pledged to her on that rooftop overlooking the Seoul Tower. She found none. "I'm sure you have," she replied simply, and carried Sua upstairs to bed, leaving Do-yoon alone in the dining room with his own encroaching silence. That was the night Maya relinquished hope, though she would not fully acknowledge this to herself for another few weeks. Somewhere between her daughter's tears, her husband's hollow apology, and the lingering echo of the investigator's scare, the last small, tenacious fragment of her that still clung to the notion of a return to normalcy quietly let go. The 6th month arrived with a paradoxical swiftness and slowness, simultaneously faster than she anticipated and slower than she could bear. No discernible change occurred in the dynamic between Do-yoon and Maya. If anything, he had become more distant, more temperamental, and demonstrably more careless in concealing his activities, as if a part of him had already resigned himself to the marriage's conclusion, without deigning to inform his wife. On the final night of Maya's self-imposed 6-month countdown, she sat alone in Minjun's room after both children had finally drifted into a deep sleep. She watched her son's chest gently rise and fall in the soft illumination of his nightlight, and in that moment, she made the decision she had been contemplating for half a year. She would no longer await Do-yoon's initiative to prioritize his family. He had, in fact, already made his choices repeatedly and discreetly. Each late-night return. Each excuse offered without meeting her gaze. Each instance where he prioritized someone else over the woman who had meticulously structured their entire domestic life around his comfort for 8 consecutive years. Maya was finished waiting, yet she was not yet prepared to depart. Not in the manner that Do-yoon likely envisioned she would eventually do. Tearful and bereft, pleading with a family that had never welcomed her, to retain some semblance of the life she had cultivated. She possessed a modest, burgeoning investment portfolio of which Do-yoon was entirely unaware. She had a trusted confidant in the financial sector who believed in her more profoundly than her own husband ever had. She had a legal counsel who had, on one crucial occasion, safeguarded everything she had built from premature discovery. She possessed a decade of quiet observation regarding the Kang family's methods of wealth accumulation and preservation. Knowledge she intended to employ for the very first time not to serve them, but to construct something entirely her own. Standing in the doorway of her son's room that night, Maya made herself a final solemn promise before extinguishing the light. Whatever lay ahead, regardless of the time it demanded, she would not exit this marriage in the manner her mother-in-law had always presumed a woman of her background eventually would. She would depart on her own terms, and she would depart with everything she had quietly, patiently, and relentlessly earned. Standing there in the darkness, she had no inkling that the subsequent 2 years would propel her further than she had ever dared to imagine, or that the opulent mansion awaiting her at the culmination of that journey would be the least surprising element of the woman she was destined to become. The morning following Maya's decisive resolution in Minjun's doorway, she awoke early, prepared breakfast for the children as she habitually did, packed their lunches, and bid Do-yoon farewell at the door. On the surface, nothing had changed, and that, precisely, was the intended outcome. She had acquired sufficient insight by then to recognize that her greatest advantage was the one Do-yoon had unwittingly bestowed upon her. For years, he had inadvertently educated her on the profound invisibility a quiet, attentive wife could possess within her own home. Maya contacted Aryam that same week, and the two women convened across Aryam's kitchen table. The biotechnology dossier from months prior was spread out between them once more, this time accompanied by a notebook filled with Maya's meticulous handwriting. "I wish to venture beyond mere translation income," Maya declared. "I aspire to actively build something substantial, not a mere pastime, but a genuine enterprise." Aryam studied her friend for a prolonged moment. "This implies a need for patience," she stated. "It means refraining from accessing whatever we establish for a considerable period, even when circumstances at home become challenging. And after the near miss with Madame Yoon's investigator, it necessitates an even greater degree of caution than before. Are you capable of both?" "I have exercised patience for 8 years," Maya replied softly. "I believe I can manage a little longer. And as for caution," she added, "I think I have just demonstrated my capacity for it." Aryam allowed a faint smile to grace her lips, despite the gravity of their situation. "A fair point," she conceded. They commenced the process slowly, channeling a portion of Maya's translation earnings into the biotechnology investment each month, meticulously documenting every transaction in a shared spreadsheet, accessible only to the two of them. Aryam guided her through the fundamental principles of diversification, explaining the critical error most novice investors made by concentrating all their funds into a single company, even one they held in high regard. "You distribute it," Aryam instructed, tapping her pen against the notebook. "A small amount here, a small amount there. Should one venture falter, it will not result in the complete collapse of your entire portfolio." Maya absorbed each lesson with the avidity of someone starved for information that had been systematically withheld from her throughout her adult life. She remained awake long after Do-yeon had fallen asleep, engrossed in financial news on her phone, concealed beneath the blankets, diligently teaching herself to interpret quarterly earnings reports with the same patient approach she had once employed to master Korean newspapers a decade earlier. 8 months into the process, the biotechnology company, Aryam's firm, discreetly announced a significant breakthrough in a clinical trial, triggering a substantial increase in its private valuation. This development was not yet public knowledge, nor was it the kind of news that generated headlines beyond a specialized circle of investors. However, Aryam contacted Maya the very moment she received the information. "You need to sit down," Aryam advised over the phone, her voice taut with an excitement she was clearly struggling to contain. "What happened?" Maya inquired, her gaze flicking towards the kitchen doorway to ensure Do-yoon was not within earshot. This had become a habitual precaution, automatically enacted following the incident with Madame Yoon. "Our investment has just quadrupled in value," Aryam declared. "And this is still in the early stages. If the trial results hold through the subsequent phase, the potential for further growth is immense." Maya slowly sat down at the kitchen table, her eyes unfocused, experiencing a sensation she hadn't felt in an immeasurable period. It wasn't precisely relief, but something akin to empowerment. A quiet, unfamiliar feeling settled within her chest. She did not indulge in outward celebration. She confided in no one other than Aryam. That night, she prepared dinner for her family as usual, listened to Do-yoon's complaints about a colleague, assisted Sua with a coloring activity, and tucked both children into bed with the same steady calm she consistently displayed, harboring a secret that was subtly yet profoundly reshaping her entire future. The company was fully acquired 14 months after Maya's initial modest investment, a transaction that garnered brief mention in Seoul's financial publications, buried on a page Do-yoon would never peruse. Maya's investment, meticulously built from translation earnings and unwavering patience, had appreciated more than 40-fold. She met with Aryam in a quiet cafe on the day the deal was finalized, her gaze fixed on the numbers displayed on a bank statement that still felt somewhat unreal. "What do I do now?" Maya asked, her voice barely a whisper. Aryam smiled, sliding a folder across the table, this one considerably thicker than the previous one. "Now," she stated, "we ensure that no one can ever take this away from you. And this time," she added, "we won't wait for someone to start looking before we implement protective measures." That folder contained all the necessary documentation for Hana to assist Maya in transforming her windfall into something permanent and beyond reproach. "I require all arrangements to be exclusively in my name," Maya stipulated, seated opposite Hana in the familiar modest office. "I require this handled with utmost discretion. Furthermore, given the recent near catastrophe involving my mother-in-law, it must be executed in a manner that renders it unimpeachable by any authority, be it an investigators, legal counsel, or any other party." Hana observed her with professional discernment, a gaze that recognized a client possessing capabilities that initially seemed understated. "That is entirely achievable," Hana affirmed. "However, I must pose the customary inquiry. Is your husband privy to any of these developments?" "He is not," Maya stated unequivocally, "and he shall remain unaware until such time as I deem it appropriate for him to know." Over the subsequent 12-month period, Maya meticulously transformed her unexpected financial gain into tangible assets, proceeding with a measured patience that mirrored the decade-long ascent of the Kang family's wealth. A journey she had been excluded from. Initially, a modest commercial property was acquired outright by Hana's firm and subsequently placed within a private trust under Maya's name. Following this, a residential structure in an emerging sector on the city's periphery was procured at a valuation below the prevailing market rate, expedited by a seller eager for a swift conclusion. Each transaction served as an educational experience, and each property fortified a growing foundation of which June remained entirely oblivious. For the first time in her adult existence, Maya began to comprehend the profound satisfaction of constructing something on her own terms, unburdened by external validation. Concurrently, within the domestic sphere, the marital union continued its gradual and silent disintegration. Do-yoon's absences became more protracted, his pretexts increasingly transparent. He ceased even the pretense of concealing his mobile device, a habit he had previously maintained. Maya surmised this not from a decline in guilt, but rather from a nascent indifference to her awareness. Approximately 18 months after Maya commenced her clandestine enterprise, Do-yoon returned home uncharacteristically early. One evening, his demeanor tense and preoccupied, betraying concerns unrelated to his professional life. "We need to discuss matters," he announced, settling himself across from her at the kitchen table after the children had retired for the night. Maya placed the dishcloth she was holding onto the counter, her pulse remarkably steady despite the abrupt shift in his tone. "Very well," she replied. "Let us converse." Do-yoon began to articulate his thoughts with deliberate caution. "I believe we have drifted apart. I suspect we are both cognizant of this reality." Maya regarded him for an extended interval, contemplating the cumulative months, indeed years, she had awaited such a candid admission. "I have been aware of this for some time," she responded softly. Do-yoon appeared somewhat taken aback by her composure. "So you concur?" he inquired. "I concur that the marital bond is not as it once was. However," Maya continued, "I do not share your assessment of the underlying causes. It might be prudent for you to examine that question yourself before soliciting my agreement on any matter." He offered no rejoinder. He remained seated, his jaw rigid, his gaze fixed upon the tabletop separating them, and eventually excused himself to bed without further utterance. Maya remained in the kitchen long after his departure, experiencing a profound sense of finality settling within her, a sensation that resonated less as heartache and more as definitive confirmation. She understood now that whatever conclusion awaited them was inevitable, irrespective of her actions or words. Her sole intention was to be prepared for it before he was. She remained unaware of precisely how imminent that preparedness would be tested, or how inadvertently Do-yoon himself would furnish the final element she required. The culmination of Maya's clandestine endeavor occurred almost precisely 2 years subsequent to her initial modest investment, guided by Aram's Biotechnological Council. A property emerged on the market in Gangnam, a sprawling contemporary estate offering panoramic views of the district, listed by a family in the process of liquidating assets due to a failed business venture. The asking price was considerable, even by Gangnam's premium standards. However, Maya's carefully curated portfolio, painstakingly assembled over 2 years through acquisitions, dividend reinvestments, and a consistently profitable startup investment, was now sufficiently robust to accommodate it. She toured the residence unaccompanied, navigating its expansive, empty chambers adorned with floor-to-ceiling windows, a kitchen capacious enough to house her entire childhood dwelling twice over, and a garden overlooking the glittering urban panorama below. In the master suite, she envisioned the joyous sounds of her children echoing through hallways that had never borne witness to any harsh words. "This is the one," she informed Hana via telephone that evening. The property transfer was finalized 8 months prior to the night Do-yoon ultimately expelled her. Although Maya did not take up residence during this interim period, she maintained the house fully furnished and prepared, a private sanctuary she visited infrequently, standing in its hushed rooms, steeling herself for a future she had deliberately avoided fully contemplating. On a tranquil afternoon, a few weeks after the final property documentation was processed, Hannah met her at a small establishment near the estate and discreetly slid a new set of keys across the table. "Everything is now in readiness," Hannah stated simply. "The trust, the title deed, the legal safeguards, all of it. Whenever the need arises, it is already yours. It has been for some time." Maya held the keys in her palm for a prolonged moment, appreciating their unfamiliar heft, before placing them into her handbag without comment, still uncertain of the precise timing of their ultimate necessity. She confided in no one beyond Aryam and Hana, not her familial relations back in Atlanta, nor a single soul within Dune's social circle. She continued to manage the household with her customary diligence, preparing meals, assembling lunchboxes, attending Sunday gatherings at Madame Yoon's residence, absorbing every subtle slight with the practiced equanimity she had cultivated over a decade, all while holding the keys to a future utterly inconceivable to any of them. The final months preceding the unraveling of her circumstances transpired swiftly. Do-yoon grew notably less guarded, an indication to Maya that he no longer perceived any imperative to maintain appearances. His returns home became increasingly delayed. On some evenings, he forewent offering any justifications whatsoever, simply entering the residence and proceeding directly to the bathroom without a word.
One evening, Minjun, with the disarming directness characteristic of children posing the most profound questions, directly inquired whether his father still resided with them.
"He does, my darling," Maya responded gently, stroking his hair. "He has simply been exceptionally occupied." Minjun studied her expression with the discernment only a child adept at interpreting parental cues could possess. "All right," he conceded finally, his skepticism palpable but his youth precluding further challenge. Sua, for her part, had largely ceased inquiring about her father's whereabouts on most nights, quietly internalizing her disappointment, much like young children often do, storing it for later comprehension. Maya observed her children adapting to a familial dynamic that was progressively becoming untenable, and with each passing day, her resolve solidified. Whatever lay ahead, she now clearly understood, would not involve recapturing a man who had already departed in every significant aspect. It would be about ensuring her children never grew to believe this was the extent of their deserved reality. The evening on which everything irrevocably shattered arrived without forewarning, as most culminations do following protracted periods of quiet buildup. Do-yoon returned home late, later than his usual pattern, carrying the faint scent of the same floral perfume Maya had first detected over 18 months prior. However, this time he made no attempt to offer an explanation. He entered the kitchen, where Maya was completing her evening chores, and paused in the doorway for a considerable duration before speaking. "I desire a divorce," he declared, his voice devoid of inflection, almost languid, as if announcing a minor alteration to weekend plans. Maya slowly turned off the faucet, dried her hands on the towel by the sink, and faced him. "Very well," she stated. Do-yoon blinked, clearly expecting a different reaction. "Is that all?" he inquired. "What further pronouncements do you anticipate?" Maya retorted evenly. "You have been conveying this sentiment for over a year without explicitly stating it. I see no reason to feign surprise now that you have finally articulated it." He ran a hand through his hair, a fragment of his composure beginning to fray. "I believe this arrangement is preferable," he asserted. "Our marriage has run its course. We are both aware of this fact." Maya regarded him for an extended interval, scrutinizing the man she had loved for over a decade, the father of her children, now standing in their shared kitchen, delivering the dissolution of their union with the emotional weight of a corporate memorandum. "You are correct on one point," she stated softly. "It has indeed run its course. It did so a considerable time ago. You simply failed to perceive it because you were not the one awaiting a transformation." Do-yoon's jaw tightened, but he did not engage in further debate. Instead, he moved past her towards the bedroom and returned moments later bearing her suitcase, the same one she had utilized for every family excursion throughout their years together, placing it at her feet with a tenderness that somehow felt more abrasive than outright contempt. "I shall be equitable," he declared. "Take your belongings and reside with Ari for the present. We will address the apartment and the children at a later juncture." Maya's gaze dropped to the suitcase, then returned to her husband, feeling an internal alignment, a sense of calm certainty that was entirely her own. "We will address the children immediately," she declared. "Actually," she continued, "I am taking them with me this evening. It is late, Du-yoon began to protest. It is later than you realize, Maya countered, already moving towards the children's rooms. Considerably later than you comprehend. Outside, a steady and quiet rain had commenced, falling against the windows, creating an atmosphere that seemed to hold the entire city in hushed anticipation. Maya packed a small bag for each child while they slept, exercising extreme care not to awaken them prematurely, moving through the house with a composure that surprised even herself. When she finally roused Minjun gently, he blinked up at her, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "Are we traveling somewhere?" he mumbled sleepily. "We are going to a place of safety, my darling," Maya assured him, assisting him with his shoes. "I promise." Sua, still drowsy, simply wrapped her arms around Maya's neck and allowed herself to be carried out to the vehicle without question. Du-yoon stood in the doorway, observing the entire unfolding scene, a transient expression crossing his face that might have indicated regret. Maya, however, lacked the residual energy to analyze it closely enough to be certain. As she fastened the children into their car seats, Maya turned back towards the house one final time, the rain saturating her coat, and regarded the man she was leaving behind. "Check the mailbox tomorrow morning," she instructed. "There is an item addressed to your mother. She will wish to peruse it before she resorts to calling me a gold digger again." Du-yoon's countenance paled considerably, though he had no precise understanding of her meaning. "How long have you been aware?" he inquired, his voice suddenly diminished within the doorway. "Sufficiently long," Maya replied, "and you will ascertain precisely what I have done with that knowledge tomorrow." She entered the vehicle, started the engine, and drove away from the residence that had constituted her entire world for 8 years, watching it recede in the rearview mirror through the cascading rain. Her children, safely and comfortably ensconced in the back seat, were drifting back to sleep, entirely oblivious to the magnitude of the imminent transformation in their lives. She did not navigate towards Ariam's apartment. Instead, she input an address into her mobile device, an address she had committed to memory months prior and had never needed until this very night, directing her course towards the sole location in the entire metropolis that had been patiently awaiting this precise moment. The imposing gates of the mansion swung open seamlessly as Maya entered the code she had memorized earlier, the wrought iron panels gliding inward without a sound, as if the dwelling itself had been anticipating this specific evening to formally welcome her. She proceeded up the lengthy driveway at a deliberate pace, rain streaking across the windshield, her children slumbering in the rear, utterly unaware that they were about to awaken in a reality neither could have envisioned that morning. The mansion loomed ahead in the darkness, its windows unlit, its silhouette imposing against the tempestuous clouds gathering over Gangnam. Maya parked the vehicle, maintained her hands on the steering wheel for a moment, and allowed herself to finally experience the full spectrum of emotions she had suppressed for 2 consecutive years. Dating back to the evening, a florist inadvertently delivered the unvarnished truth. Her shoulders shuddered once, then twice, and the tears began to flow, silent and relentless. Not born of sorrow precisely, but rather from a profound sense of liberation. It was the exhale of a woman who had held her breath through 6 months of vigilant observation, 3 harrowing weeks of near discovery, and 2 years dedicated to constructing something no one had believed her capable of achieving. She wiped her face, checked on her children in the rearview mirror, and carried them inside one by one. Sua first, then Minjun, gently placing them both in a guest chamber on the 2nd floor, tucking blankets around them with the same meticulous care she had exercised every night of their lives, irrespective of their current dwelling. Subsequently, Maya returned downstairs alone, stood in the marble foyer of a home unequivocally hers, and remained there in the profound silence, listening to the rain against the windows, feeling the weight of 2 years of covert labor finally solidify into tangible reality. She experienced little sleep that night. She occupied the kitchen island, a cup of cooling tea cradled in her hands, gazing out at the scattered city lights below, contemplating the letter resting in Do-yoon's mailbox, awaiting the dawn. The preparation of that letter had consumed nearly 3 weeks, involving late evenings spent with Hana after the children had retired, meticulously compiling every piece of corroborating evidence she had discreetly gathered over the preceding 18 months. Duplicates of the florist's delivery error, the appended note addressed to Do-yoon, a printed screenshot of a message that had once illuminated Do-yoon's lock screen, and a photograph captured from a considerable distance in the lobby of a Shimadam hotel depicting her husband in a compromising embrace with another woman, leaving no room for ambiguity. The travel itinerary for Jeju, bearing 2 names and a single room reservation for a party of 2. Hana had meticulously assisted in organizing these materials into a polished, professional package addressed directly to Madame Yoon, accompanied by a brief handwritten correspondence from Maya. "Dearest Emma," the letter commenced, though Maya had almost obliterated that salutation a dozen times before electing to retain it. It served as a final acknowledgement of a decade spent striving to earn a place within that family. "I am aware you never considered me a fitting member of this family. Nevertheless, I dedicated a decade to proving you incorrect. I am now finished with the necessity of proving anything to anyone. I merely wished for you to confront the truth before you once again concluded that I was the source of the problem. What your son has inflicted upon this family is not a creation of mine. It is merely something I resolved no longer to conceal." She had sealed the envelope and, on a late evening while Do-yoon was still at work, driven to the Kang family estate to personally deposit it into their mailbox, timed precisely for the morning following the complete unraveling of her circumstances. Morning arrived at the mansion bathed in soft golden light, a stark contrast to the previous night's tempest. Maya awoke at an early hour, prepared coffee in a kitchen that had yet to witness any use, and stood by the window, observing the sunlight cascade across the distant Han River. Minjin found her there 20 minutes later, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, his gaze sweeping across the immense, unfamiliar room with wide, hesitant curiosity. "Oma," he murmured slowly, "are we wealthy now?" Maya knelt before her son, gently brushing his hair back from his forehead, carefully considering her response. "We are secure now," she stated. "That holds greater significance than wealth. But yes, my darling, we will be all right. More than all right." Sua wandered in moments later, still half asleep, and simply settled into Maya's lap without a single question, content in the way only a 4-year-old can be when their mother is close by. Across the city, in a residence that suddenly felt exceedingly silent, Do-yoon proceeded to the mailbox that same morning, still unsettled from the previous night's events, and discovered a substantial envelope addressed to his mother, resting atop the usual assortment of bills. A chilling premonition seized him, a portion of his being already comprehending its contents before he even opened it. He did not have the opportunity to intercept it. Madame Yoon, an early riser by habit, had already collected the mail minutes earlier and was seated at her kitchen table when Do-yoon entered, the envelope already open before her. Photographs were spread across the table, resembling evidence presented in a trial. "What is the meaning of this?" Madame Yoon demanded, her voice low and menacing in a manner Do-yoon had not heard directed at him since his childhood. "Oma, allow me to explain," Do-yoon began, but his mother raised a hand, instantly silencing him. "Explain what precisely?" she retorted, gesturing towards the photograph of him and Sumin outside the hotel. "Explain why the family's reputation is about to be broadcast across every gossip network in Gangnam, because you were incapable of restraining your impulses. Explain why your wife, the woman I have critiqued for a decade, is apparently the sole adult in this entire situation who has conducted herself with any measure of dignity. Do-yoon had no response. He stood in his mother's kitchen, the same woman who had spent years diminishing Maya's self-worth and making her feel unwelcome. The same woman who had expended considerable resource attempting to unearth secrets that were not her concern, only to witness her fury now directed entirely at him. Within a week, news had permeated beyond the confines of the Kang family's kitchen. A colleague of Do-yoon's, while reviewing property registration filings for an unrelated business matter, stumbled upon a familiar name associated with an unfamiliar address. A $40 million mansion in Gangnam with Maya Whitfield listed as the sole proprietor. Word spread with remarkable speed thereafter, as it invariably does within closely interconnected business circles, initially as whispers, then evolving into open discussions, until eventually reaching Do-yoon directly via a telephone call from an old business associate who inquired, with a mixture of jest and seriousness, whether his ex-wife had perhaps won the lottery. Doon appeared at the mansion's gates. 2 days later, Madame Yoon trailing reluctantly behind him, both regarding the property with expressions oscillating between disbelief and dawning consternation. Maya met them at the gate herself, arms crossed, her composure radiating a calm that clearly unsettled them both. "How is this conceivable?" Doon demanded, gesturing towards the opulent residence behind her. "From whence did this fortune originate?" "I earned it," Maya stated simply, calmly, patiently. "While you were occupied constructing a second existence you presumed I remained unaware of." Madame Yoon stepped forward, regaining enough composure to attempt one of her familiar maneuvers. "You should have informed your husband of this wealth," she declared sharply. "A wife does not conceal such matters from her family." Maya almost laughed, though the moment possessed no trace of levity. "A husband does not book hotel rooms and book flights for another woman either," she countered evenly. "Yet, here we are, interestingly how that transpires. And for what it is worth," she added, her gaze fixed directly on her mother-in-law, "the individual you engaged a few months ago was demonstrably not as thorough as you had anticipated." Madame Yoon's expression became immobile. Neither offered a reply. Do-yoon stood there, his jaw set rigidly, observing the woman he had spent a decade underestimating, seemingly incapable of reconciling the quiet, submissive individual he believed he knew with the one standing confidently before a mansion his own family could not afford to replicate twice over. "We must address child custody," he stated finally, redirecting the conversation to a domain he believed he could still control. "We shall," Maya replied, "through legal channels." "This is precisely how the situation should have been initiated, the moment you decided our marriage was no longer worthy of preservation." She turned and proceeded back through the gates without further utterance, leaving them both standing outside, gazing up at a structure that symbolized everything they had never conceived her capable of achieving. The ensuing dissolution of the marriage briefly became a topic of hushed discussion within the tightly knit corporate landscape of Gangnam. This attention wasn't solely due to the considerable financial implications, although a sum of $40 million would naturally draw notice anywhere. It stemmed more significantly from the meticulously prepared and irrefutable evidence compiled by Maya's legal team. This comprehensive dossier was the product of 18 months of discreet and vigilant surveillance. Doon's legal counsel made a perfunctory attempt to argue that Maya's recent financial success should grant him a larger portion of the settlement, proposing that her investments had somehow been funded by marital assets. Haino, however, systematically dismantled this assertion within a single afternoon by presenting bank statements. These records demonstrated conclusively that every investment Maya had made originated from her own independent freelance earnings meticulously tracked from the initial deposit and kept entirely separate from any joint or household accounts ever managed by Dune. Concurrently, the evidence of the extramarital affair, the floral tributes, the exchanged messages, the clandestine hotel photograph, and the travel itinerary rendered any argument concerning child custody equally untenable. Do-youn's attorneys discreetly advised him to reach an agreement rather than risk a public custody dispute, which would inevitably reveal far more of the secrets he had strived for over a year to conceal. In the final negotiated settlement, Maya was granted primary legal and physical custody of both Imjun and Sua, with Dune permitted regular supervised visitation. He retained his executive position within the family enterprise, although several partners discreetly distanced themselves in the months following the scandal. Apprehensive of the reputational damage, Madame Yoon's social standing, painstakingly cultivated over 3 decades, suffered irreparable cracks, becoming the subject of whispers at the very same social events where she had once gossiped about Maya. Suman Jang, as was later learned through mutual connections, departed the country entirely within a few months of the affair becoming public knowledge. Whatever she and Dune had attempted to construct together clearly could not withstand public scrutiny any more successfully than his marriage had. Maya, however, retained everything she had diligently built. The grand residence and various properties had been quietly acquired over a 2-year period. The investment accounts, unknown to Dune until it was far too late for him to assert any claim, and most importantly, the custody of her 2 children, who had witnessed their mother's gradual and quiet transformation. She evolved from someone who absorbed every indignity without complaint into a woman who refused to be marginalized for another day. This was a woman who had even endured being pursued and emerged on the other side with her life and assets intact. Do-yoon made contact only once in the subsequent months. A brief message, sent late one night, simply read, "I am sorry. I did not comprehend what I possessed." Maya read it twice, seated in solitude on the mansion's terrace, gazing out at the Han River, the same vista she had once envisioned herself enjoying before all of this had transpired. She did not respond. Some apologies, she had come to understand, were not intended for the recipient at all. Their sole purpose was to alleviate the sender's burden, and she no longer felt compelled to bear that weight for him. She placed her phone face down on the table beside her, surveyed the water, and quietly spoke the words to no one but herself and the distant city lights below. "You believed I was leaving with nothing," she stated. "I was departing with everything that held true value." Life within the mansion gradually began to feel less foreign. Minjin claimed the bedroom with the river view as his own, still occasionally questioning Maya if this was indeed their home, still adapting to a semblance of stability he had not previously thought attainable. Sua adorned the playroom walls with drawings haphazardly taped across every surface, her laughter now uninhibited, a stark contrast to the final months of her parents' union. Aryam practically resided there on weekends, and some of Maya's most cherished evenings were spent simply sitting on the terrace with him while the children played nearby, sharing inconsequential laughter and observing the sprawling panorama of city lights. Maya eventually embarked on a new endeavor, one she hadn't initially planned. She began mentoring young foreign women residing in Seoul, women navigating the complexities of intercultural marriages, motherhood, and the peculiar isolation of establishing a life far removed from all that is familiar. She undertook this not for personal recognition, but because she vividly recalled the profound isolation of being in a marriage that had ceased to offer protection, with no one in her corner and no recourse. She resolved that no other woman should ever experience such profound solitude. People occasionally inquire of Maya, even now, what advice she would offer to women in similar predicaments. women feeling financially trapped in unions they recognize are irrevocably over. Women who have relinquished their careers and autonomy to build a family that no longer appears to value them as promised. Her response remains consistent. Silence, she explains, is not always an admission of defeat. At times, a woman's most potent action is not an immediate, boisterous confrontation. It is the quiet, unseen labor. This labor, pursued with unwavering consistency and patience over an extended period, even when someone seeks to disrupt it before it is complete, while everyone around her continues to underestimate her capabilities. For 6 months, Maya observed, waited, and remained silent. This was not an act of weakness, but rather the strategic laying of the groundwork for all that was to follow. For an additional 2 years, she quietly built her life within the periphery of an existence that had ceased to accommodate her, surviving even the moment when it nearly collapsed following a single overheard phone conversation. Resolute in her refusal to allow others' diminished expectations to dictate her true potential. She was not expelled from her marriage that rainy night. She simply stepped, at long last, into the life she had already meticulously constructed for herself and her children, a life that others had failed to believe existed until its very manifestation unfolded before them. And no one, not her husband, not his mother, not the investigator hired to uncover her secrets, not a single individual who had ever doubted her, could ever seize that from her. If Maya's narrative has resonated with your own quiet fortitude, or that of someone you know, this is where that story gains significance. Subscribe if this channel has earned a place in your viewing habits, and stay engaged, as there are numerous other women like Maya whose experiences warrant sharing. Before you depart, consider a question worthy of contemplation. If you were in Maya's situation, observing everything and remaining silent, would you have waited, or would you have departed the moment you discovered that initial bouquet? I am genuinely interested in understanding your perspective and the reasoning behind it. Please share your thoughts in the comments section. Thank you for watching until the very end. I will see you in the next installment.